All right, Battletech enthusiasts, taking a pause for a moment from the clans. Been looking at some clan tech, been thinking about some different mechs on there, and we're going to jump back a little bit. Forward, back a little bit in the timeline, and look at some of the Inner Sphere classics that I really, really enjoy playing. We were talking about the Warhammer, naturally the Marauder. We were exploring the Archer. I often play the Archer. In this podcast, the Longbow. So we've got the Archer podcast up there in the archives. Hopefully this will add a little compare and contrast on there. A really, really iconic mech. But very, very interesting, very, very challenging. So we're looking at stock. You have two LRM-20s, right away Fritz likes, and two LRM-5s. So we're taking a role of a mech, a very, very specialized weapon, and we are jacking it up to the extreme on there. Right away, redundancy is important. I mean, redundancy across any war game is very, very important. With Battletech, it's equally important because there's a lot of modifiers in play. I mean, this idea that 1 is none, 2 is 1, 3 is some. So if you're just shooting one weapon, if we're a mech and I have 1 or 2 primary weapons, usually you see this on a light mech or a medium mech, well, first I have to figure out my movement. +1 or +2, run or walk, maybe jump or something. Then I've got to add on the range. So that's going to pull things up a little bit. Then I have to add on or take into account your speed. Then we have to take into account terrain. So for the most part, unless I'm point blank and you haven't moved and you're hopping around on one leg, what am I going to need to hit you on 2d6? 6s, 8s, 11s, and 12s. Now you could be rolling legendary all night, but this idea of to fire one weapon with all those modifiers, can I really rely on it hitting? We see this with mechs that can fire 2 weapons, maybe like 2 PPCs with heat sinks that can sustain it. They become much more deadly because now it's not just like Fritz fired the PPC and he missed, I'm safe. No, I've got another one on there, right? The Longbow has that redundancy in that you've got the 2 20 packs and you've got the 2 5 packs. So right away, even a single Longbow is an interesting force on the table. So that's the first consideration why I like this mech, because it has built-in redundancy. I can, depending on the battle value, or if you're going by tonnage, I can build in more redundancy and take 2 or 3 Longbows. But unlike a lot of other mechs, just taking one, you've got the redundancy built in. Second, the LRM-20 spread. This idea that if I hit you and I connect, okay, now we got to see the clusters and how many missiles hit and all that type of stuff. With a 20-pack, if I roll average, that's a decent spread. That's comparable to a barrage of medium lasers. If I roll legendary, that's brutal. If I hit you with 2 LRM-20s and I roll legendary, that's going to brutalize you also, unless you're like, a Stalker or an Atlas or something like that. If you're a medium mech, I just caught you with your pants down, you're in a lot of trouble on there. If I roll poorly, okay, it's still a little bit of something. I mean, there's this swing to see that. With a 20 and a 15 pack, you're watching those dice when I roll it. As soon as we get down to a 10 pack, if I roll average, okay, I can take it. When you get down to the 5 pack, it's like, okay, on there. Absolutely different rolls. There are brackets, there are rolls for a 5 and a 10 pack and a 15 and a 20 pack. But with the Longbow, with the 220s, backed up by the little extra punch of the 5s, it's very, very interesting. Okay, ammo. Well, the bane or possibly not of everything. I am thinking back, there has been maybe 1 or 2 games, and I regularly run Longbows and Archers. There have been maybe 1 or 2 games out of dozens and dozens of games where I've run out of ammo on there. And I'm firing these things every turn. I mean, if I can hit you, put it this way, I'm not saying this is tactically sound, but if I'm in range, I'm rolling those dice because it's Battletech and crazy stuff happens, and tonight might be your night. Tonight might be the legendary night that we will be talking about forever. So if you're in range and I need 12s, I'm going to go for it on there. So I tend to be very aggressive with my shooting, and I tend to be very aggressive with the Longbows on there. Now, if I'm in a campaign, or if it's starting with random ammo for a narrative, well, you know what? Maybe that's a different story on there. You know, if I'm going in to hold a certain area and it's going to be 2 or 3 linked missions and I don't have a resupply and I'm bringing a longbow, I really got to maybe pick and choose or be a little bit more conservative on there. But generally, I find ammo's not a problem. Unless we're talking about, I mean, you are literally a walking arsenal of stuff. I mean, all the missiles, internally, the tech, all the missiles stuffed into that mech, that's a problem. If it goes to internals, you're probably going to go boom boom on there. You're gonna pop. But at the same time, on paper, this looks like a consideration where a lot of players will look and automatically reject the longbow. I mean, certainly you could take something like the Archer or the Bombardier, but something that's all in for LRMs, they'll look and automatically reject because they're like, the armor is pretty paper thin. So on the arms, which are the missile pods, you're going to lose those pretty fast, and then you're going to be into internals and you're probably going to explode. But what I find on the table, and of course this is the give and take, the longbow, it doesn't have the speed, it doesn't have the armor. If you close, if there's some heavy mechs that close on me, I'm in trouble anyway. I really am. I'm probably not going to make it out of this encounter with that on there. So it's not that much of, well, it's always a problem, of course, yes, but it's not that much of a problem because I have to do my best not to let something get up there. So that's another consideration. The biggest challenge that I find with the longbow, hex map or traditional wargaming table. I define this as a hex map. You're playing one hex map or you're putting 2 together. That makes for a much quicker and a much more intense Battletech. There's only so many places you can go. And turn 1, I define Battletech this idea where you're navigating back and forth, you're firing at each other for long range. You need 11s and 12s to hit. You might connect, you might not. But then at some point when you close to medium and short range, for medium mechs, for heavy mechs, for assault mechs, I consider, this is my terminology, I consider us now engaged. I really can't disengage. This idea, if I've got 2 or 3 mechs and you've got 2 or 3 mechs and we're facing off against each other, I'm going to do my best, of course, to have terrain, to maybe block shots to the leg or get cover. I'm going to try and catch you out in the open. I'm going to try and limit mobility. I mean, you're going to do this to me also. But there's this idea, this back and forth idea that tactically, I'm going to try and do the best I can. But once we commit, we're in there. If I break and run, light mechs, this doesn't apply to. If I break and run, you're going to get rear armor. You're going to get side armor. I need to keep my guns facing you on there. And then, if my guns are facing you, it's slugging things out. And it's like, who's going to break first? Who's going to get critted first? What's going to happen? So we close even more to what I define as danger close, where now we're one step away from punching and kicking. We're charging. We're firing everything. You're rolling for machine guns. You're rolling for small lasers. You're doing medium lasers. You're cooking off everything on there. There's no going back. So with a hex map, I find literally because it's compressed and there's not as many places to go, you reach that critical we're engaged to danger close much, much quicker. In that regard, the longbow doesn't have as much tactical flexibility because it's easy to force the longbow into engagement on there. Yeah, the hex map, you might be up on a hill. You might have a couple of options on there. You could fire off on some other stuff. Playing on the hex map, what I also find is with something like the longbow, light mechs get brutalized. Yes, light mech is going to stay away from range. It's going to be utilizing speed. But the fact if I need 10s and 11s to 12 to hit you with that longbow and I'm firing off a 20, a 20, a 5, and a 5, if I connect with one of those 20s, your light mech is just smoked, and you don't have as much maneuverability on the table. So there are considerations on there. Where it really shines is going to a traditional wargaming table. I define that as the old school kind of roll out the felt map on your dining room table, set up some trees, set up some buildings, set up some hills, and let's go at each other. you have a lot of room to maneuver. So now if there's a central piece of terrain and you and I are trying to control that terrain, and we're trying to gain an advantage, and whatever happens, you as my opponent, you gain that advantage, you've secured that terrain, you're in there, I can choose to disengage. I physically have room on the table to move up, back and forth. Light mechs are a little bit more diverse in that they really can run around the side. The Longbow has enough maneuverability on a traditional wargaming table where I can get into position and start shooting across some missiles and stuff like that. And then if you try to make a play for me, I can disengage and run away. I have maneuverability. Even again, I know it's a slow mech. So I find it does better, lasts longer on a traditional wargaming table. Two other elements to consider in here. Indirect fire. The Longbow is an indirect fire machine. Certainly, look, you can have, there's times I've had my Thorn. It's a light mech. Looks kind of like a pod type mech. LRM-5 stock mech, and it's got the medium lasers. I use that as a skirmisher. I send that mech in. I just kind of lob some missiles on there. Maybe I get you to run me down, see what we can do, create opportunity on the table. When there's engagement with the Thorn, engaging my other units, the Thorn's on its own. The Thorn then switches over to indirect fire. That's an example of, okay, look, I have some ability to indirect fire. I'm going to use it. I'll throw it in there. We'll see what can happen. Maybe I'll roll 12s to hit on there. And I've got my spotter working. Taking one Longbow, it has, again, this redundancy where it becomes extremely viable as a indirect fire platform. It's kind of the equivalent of taking an LRM carrier on there. That's the strategy you want to incorporate. Now, I utilize locusts because one of my personal Battletech goals is to become the most feared locust pilot in the inner sphere on there. And I can draw on, I have a maximum of 10 locusts that I can draw on. I think the max I ever got on the table was 8. I mean, I went a little bit crazy with that. You guys know how that is, right? It's just, you're trolling, it's late at night. Like it is right now, and you're kind of just checking out Battletech stuff. You get a couple of ideas in your head. Next thing you know, you're on the IWM site, you're trolling on eBay, and you're like, what? You wake up the next morning, you're like, what did I do? On there. Somehow I ordered 10 locusts. So playing this, but having some sort of light mech to spot and using the Longbow either as an individual or part of an LRM suppression indirect fire team is beast. It's got a lot of punch in there, especially if you're going to take 2 or 3. The one thing, though, in order to make that work is you need, and now this is something I can, I'll share with you what I utilize, but you got to figure out what you're going to utilize. You need some sort of blocking type unit. One of my Lance builds will be, depending on the battle value, of course, 2 to 3 longbows, or maybe 2 archers and a longbow, some sort of combination in there, multiple locusts, and a couple of medium mechs. So I send out the locusts to spot. I send out the locusts to skirmish, to run around. I send out the medium mechs, usually griffins and things like that, PPC, LRM type combos. Send them out to do a little sniper type work, and then just have this walking fire base of archers and longbows and maybe even LRM carriers if I'm going total battle value craziness. If we're talking like 10 to 12K battle value, which for Inner Sphere, that's got some bite. 10K battle value clans is like, I've got 3 mechs. It's really kind of interesting. Bouncing back and forth between the clans and Inner Sphere. I put that stuff down in terms of the longbows or the archers. You're not going to let that happen. You're going to send something that's called an assault mech or an assault lance up there to rock me, because if you can get to danger close, you're just going to fold through my armor. So some sort of blocking unit, mech, build something. I usually throw down demolishers because they're not really going to go anywhere. You're going to want to get close. So even if I take motive damage and I get immobilized and stuff, they've got the turret. They're a great blocking unit. And, my big guns philosophy is right there. That's 4 AC-20s. That's, put that 5-6 hexes forward. That's interesting with the longbows, because when you engage the range of the units you select is key. When you engage my demolishers, you're going to try and stay on the outer bracket of it, because you don't want me rolling for short range with those AC-20s. if I'm throwing down 2 to 3 demolishers on there. That's 246. That's 2-4 AC-20s or 246 AC-20s. That's got the redundancy. That's got the punch. That makes even possibly an Atlas start to sweat it out a little bit on there. So I want to push you out where you're going to be shooting at me, but I'm going to need what? 8s, 9s, 10s to hit you? Hey, I've got the redundancy. I might connect. But by pushing you out, that's going to push the longbows and archers behind. That's going to keep me at that medium range bracket, which protects me from incoming fire, but still gives me enough of a spread with the redundancy on the longbows. I know we're crunching the numbers here. We're crunching the numbers. Looking at that. Something to block it. Occasionally, if I'm in ultra theme mode, I love the T-bolt, Thunderbolt. I'll put a Thunderbolt instead of a blocker on there. If I need more mobility, we'll go for that. Sometimes I'll put down a Warhammer. Warhammer's not the best choice on there. I know that, but I like the Warhammer on there. So having the Warhammer, forcing the Warhammer to hold its ground and engage, that's tough. That's really tough. And we've talked about in the Warhammer podcast and vlog, my idea, my vision of that role on there. But personally, when I play, I don't always take the most optimal because it's kind of like, well, these are some mechs I feel like playing. So from that perspective, with the longbow, I find it very interesting. I find it very, very seductive. I find it tactically on the table with such a focused role, putting that down on the table and delivering that tactically. But there are these considerations. There are these checklists that we need to look at, and we need to at least have not all the answers for tactically, because I can't cover everything. But at least if I can cover enough of these bases so as my opponent interacts with me, I can try to counter it with something. And in doubt, for those times tactically when I don't really know what to do. You're kind of surrounding me. I don't know what's going to be the thrust of your attack. Are you really going to commit? I find when in doubt, release all safeties, fire off everything, and just go in and charge and start slugging it out and bring out the big guns, because that's going to force some sort of resolution really, really quick. And either I'm going to crush you, or if I don't, I'm going to earn some mad glory, and it's going to be an awesome, awesome game of Battletech.